Okay, Hare Krishna. So this is our fifth part of our Bhagavad Gita class, the Bhakti Shastri. Today we're going to finish chapter 2, and we're on text 54 through 72. That'll conclude the chapter. So we'll get started here. In the last section, through verses 51 through 53, it introduced the topic of what happens when the practice of karma yoga, performed without material desires, matures, and it results in practical knowledge of the soul. So we began in the section before, early in that section, we talked about how Krishna gave Arjuna the theoretical knowledge of the soul. He described all of the different features of it. But because it's so amazing, it's not very comprehensible by most people just by hearing about it. So generally, it takes some level of practice, some kind of sadhana, in order to make that knowledge, we call it the vijnana, become realized, or Prabhupada says practical, something that we can really experience and apply. And so for Arjuna, Krishna recommended this nishkama karma yoga, or doing his dharma, without any kind of material desires attached to it. Simply doing it because it's the right thing. And we said that for us, as bhakta yogis, that our dharma is to serve Krishna. And so the corresponding dharma would be to serve Krishna without material desires. And we mentioned how by doing that, that leads to atma-jnana, or the ability to understand the soul in a practical way. And so where we're at then we talked about this yoga ladder before, how in the first chapter 2 through 6, there's this progression of yogas. We talked about that. And so here we're at that point where karma yoga matures into jnana yoga. So by that acting without material desires, doing the right thing because it's the right thing, that one gains greater knowledge, real realization of especially of the nature of the soul. And so that's where we left off, and that serves as a jumping off point for the verses that we're going to cover today. There's a little difference in terminology. In 53, Krishna talked about achala buddhis, and here the equivalent terminology we're going to see in this last section of verses that we're covering today is sthita pragyasya, and those two things are equivalent to one another. And there's a couple of different ways to look at them, from the yoga ladder way and from the bhakti way. And Srila Prabhupada translates them in a very bhakti-centered way. We talked about it when we talked about the yoga ladder, that the particular other yogas there, the karma yoga and the jnana yoga and even the meditational dhyana yoga or ashtanga yoga, isn't practical for us these days. We don't have the qualification for it, and the social structure doesn't really exist for it. And so bhakti yoga is the only practical measure. And so that's why Srila Prabhupada really focuses on bhakti, even though he acknowledges the presence of these other yogas in his Bhagavad Gita as it is. And that's why also he makes very bhakti-centered translations at times. We also understood, though, from Prabhupada's commentary, that if we understand the other yogas, he said if we want to analyze bhakti, break it into its parts minutely, these other yogas are important to that. There are components of those yogas that make up and persist in bhakti. And so we're also going to consider what these other yogas, because they're going to help us to understand how healthy our bhakti is. If we're missing something or if we need some adjustment, it'll help us to understand bhakti by understanding these other yogas. So we're gonna focus on bhakti, since that's the only practical thing we have. But we're going to try to understand how the other yogas function, so that we can see how they integrate into bhakti and understand our bhakti better. So Prabhupada gives a very bhakti-centered translation of these two terms. The Achala Buddhist, he says, is divine consciousness, and that comes in his the smooth translation of text 53. And the Stikta Pragyasya, this comes from his a word for word of one who is situated in fixed Krishna consciousness. Okay, so these are very bhakti-centered ones. If you're looking more from the yoga ladder perspective, how it's nishkama karma yoga moving into jnana yoga, a more literal translation makes sense. And Prabhupada gives those actually in the word for word to text 53. Achala, he says, is unflinching, and buddhi is intelligence. So in the smooth translation, it says divine consciousness, or in the word for word, it comes to unflinching intelligence. And the Stita Pragyasya, our Garuda Prabhu, Srila Prabhupada's disciple, who made a very literal translation of the Gita for the academic world, says he translates Pragyasya as profound knowledge. So the more literal translation of Stita Pragyasya would be of one who is situated. I'm just substituting. I'm using Prabhupada's words except for the final words of one who is situated in fixed, profound knowledge. Okay. Because those who are practicing Nishkama Karma Yoga aren't overtly practicing bhakti, so it wouldn't be fixed in Krishna consciousness for them. So, at this stage of the yoga ladder, the practitioner is gaining practical knowledge of the soul. And for us, as practitioners of bhakti, that indicates, since that Nishkama Karma Yoga is included, because it's just different kind of dharma. They perform their dharma according to the varnashram system, where we perform our eternal dharma, which is service to Krishna. They do it without material desires, desiring material results. We do the same thing because we're serving Krishna. So in that way, the soul realizing aspect is present in both. And so we should be, just like they do when they practice Nishkama Karma Yoga, begin to realize more and more themselves as a soul. We should be doing the same thing. And the Stita Pragyasya, or Prabhupada says fixed in Krishna consciousness, it indicates to me that the practical knowledge of the soul is integral in becoming steady in one's practice of bhakti. So we should be, as we practice bhakti, especially as we become steadier, we should be understanding ourselves more practically instead of theoretically, as spirit souls, rather than as minds and bodies. And the more that increases, the easier it is for us to become steady. So that's really what we want to take away from this Nishkama Karma Yoga transitioning into Jnana Yoga. That's really what's relevant to our practice. So Krishna introduced that topic in 51 through 53 verses, and then here in 54, starting our section for today, Arjuna asked Krishna for more details about such a person. Krishna gave some introductory information, and now Arjuna wants more information, and so it's Stita Pragyasya ka bhasha samadhistasya keshava stita di kim prabhasheta kim asita vrajeta kim. This is 254. And Arjuna says, O Krishna, what are the symptoms of one whose consciousness is thus merged in transcendence? How does he speak, and what is his language? How does he sit, and how does he walk? So there's going to be 4 questions here that he asks, and we'll discuss the answers to those. The ka bhasha, Prabhupada says, of what language, seems to serve 2 functions in Prabhupada's translation. He says, what are the symptoms? The other commentators say that bhasha means how is he described. So when Prabhupada says what are the symptoms, that's coming from the ka bhasha part. And then Prabhupada also mentioned what is his language, and so he seems to to tie that in with how he speaks, which is prabhashita. But there's four things involved here. So we'll look at the four questions. Prabhupada seems to use that one in a dual sense. And the first one is, what are the general symptoms of someone who has sthita pragya, that fixed profound knowledge or fixed Krishna consciousness if we're bhaktas? What does it mean that we have that fixed intelligence? And Prabhupada mentions in his purport to 254, he says, as there are symptoms for each and every man in terms of his particular situation, similarly, one who is Krishna conscious has his particular nature, talking, walking, thinking, feeling, etc. So he says he can be recognized, or she can be recognized in terms of certain characteristics and behaviors. And so the answer to that first question, what are the general symptoms, is given in text 255. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Prajahati Yada Kaman Sarvan Partha Manogatan Atmanyevatmana Tushta Sthita Pragyastadochate. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, O Partha, when a man gives up all varieties of desire for sense gratification, which arise from mental concoction, and when his mind thus purified finds satisfaction in the self alone, then he is said to be in pure transcendental consciousness. He says, sthita pragya. So giving up all varieties of desire for sense gratification which arise from the mind. Manogatan is the word, mental concoction, or the coming from the mind, and all desires, kaman. And it says when somebody then is satisfied in the self, then that is a sign that they are a sthita pragya, or someone who's fixed in the divine consciousness, as Prabhupada called it. That means a little bit different things for the person in the yoga ladder and someone who's in bhakti. Someone on the yoga ladder, it says they can understand that because they're souls, that the mind and the senses also, but here particularly the mind is being mentioned, is not an integral part of oneself. That the mind is separate. And generally, we strongly identify with the mind, even if we can consider that we're not bodies. And we can kind of do that a little bit more easily. And we go to sleep at night and we have dreams where we usually have our own body, but we know that our real physical body is lying in the bed when we wake up. So we can have a notion that just kind of mentally you can have even a body, as we do in dreams. So we can kind of more intuitively understand ourselves as not physical bodies. But the mind is more difficult. And in the West, that's usually all they can come up with, is they have the mind and body duality. They don't have the notion of the observer, the one who's conscious, the soul, as a separate thing. So and so therefore we take the mind very seriously. We say, I think. We don't say, my mind thinks. Sometimes in bhakti, we start taking on that kind of terminology. I'm having trouble with my mind. My mind is disturbed. Even other people will say that. But generally we say, I think this or I think that. We identify very closely. So it says that when one begins to understand oneself as a soul, then the identification with the mind and the body decrease. And so therefore, what the mind says isn't taken with the same degree of seriousness as it is usually done when the identification is stronger. So then they can the desires come, but they don't worry about it, and then eventually they even stop coming for them, or more or less. And then in Bhakti, Prabhupada says in his purport, says the highly developed soul always remains satisfied in himself by realizing himself as the eternal servitor of the Supreme Lord. Such a transcendentally situated person has no sense desires resulting from petty materialism. Rather, he remains always happy in his natural position of eternally serving the Supreme Lord. So there's the difference here is that the yogi may understand that that they're not their body or mind, but are a soul. But here, the bhakta understands that they are a soul whose position is the servant of Krishna. That's their identity. That they're souls that are, as Prabhupada says, part and parcel of Krishna, and it's their dharma to serve. But you notice that Prabhupada says a couple different times, he says eternally, as the eternal servitor of the Supreme Lord, and eternally serving the Supreme Lord. This also indicates some level of soul realization. We can be bodies, and we can be minds, and we can be servants. But we can't be eternal, because the body and mind don't exist eternally. So when Prabhupada says we think of ourselves as the eternal servitor of the Lord, that indicates that we have some level of understanding of the soul. And so that is required for what's described in this verse to obtain, that we're free from those desires that come from the mind and are satisfied, tushta. That's required. It has to be that realization of the soul in order for those things to happen. The second of the four questions is, it says, what does the Sthitapragya say or think to themselves when confronted with suffering or with opportunities for enjoyment? So it says, it's Kim Prabhashita, what do they say? And the implication is that what do they say under certain circumstances? And therefore you can understand where they're coming from. And so Prabhupada says in his purport, he says, as a rich man has his symptoms by which he is known as a rich man, as a diseased man has his symptoms by which he is known as diseased, or as a learned man has his symptoms, so a man in transcendental consciousness of Krishna has specific symptoms. In various dealings, one can know his specific symptoms from the Bhagavad Gita. And that's from 254 in the purport. So let's take a look and see, what do they say, or what do they think? So sometimes it says, if asked, they will say a certain thing, and otherwise they will think in a certain way when confronted with either suffering or opportunities for enjoyment. And the answer is given in two verses. The answer to this question in the 256 and 257. And 256 is, one who is not disturbed in mind, even amidst the threefold miseries, or elated when there is happiness, and who is free from attachment, fear, and anger, is called a sage of steady mind. So there's the threefold miseries we hear a great deal about. Adhyatmaka, those that come from the body and the mind. The Bhautika, which come from other living entities, other people, oftentimes, other creatures. And then Adidaivaka, the things that come from the devatas or come by other fate, the kind of natural disasters and other external things. Sometimes we call them acts of God in Western language. Heat and cold and rain and storms and all kind of things like that. From our natural environment. And so it says that they're not disturbed when these things happen, or when there's opportunity for happiness, and then they're free from attachment, fear, and anger. That's those, and we'll see why this is considered to be answers to how they speak in a moment. 257 says, in the material world, one who is unaffected by whatever good or evil he may obtain, neither praising it nor despising it, is firmly fixed in perfect knowledge, and that kind of indicates. So let's take a look here at how somebody on the yoga ladder, now moving into Jnana Yoga, will look at that and how we look at it in bhakti. So from the yoga ladder perspective, it says they consider both happiness and distress the results of karma. They're karma that's come to fruition. It's called parabdha karma. And so they don't blame anyone for it. Except for themselves. So it says they're not attached to anything that they have. any possessions that they have. They don't have attachments to that because it comes and goes due to that karma. So they're not fearful of what will happen because also they consider that to be determined already by their karma, and so there's nothing to do about it, and they're not angry when something unpleasant happens either. This is the attachment, fear, and anger part of the verse, because also they feel that this is just something what's happening due to their past karma. They simply have to tolerate it. That's their intellectual understanding of it. So we're when we're attached, especially identifying ourselves with the body and mind, then we worry about these things. We think that whatever we have is very important to us and key to our happiness. We are trying to make sure that we maintain those things that we need. We're afraid of the future, oftentimes, because we're afraid of what bad things might happen that will cause us unhappiness. And when we fail to get what we want or something, a reversal happens, we tend to get angry about it. Somebody's fault. They did this to me. We look for the agents of the action, and we don't see it as the results of our own karma. We think somebody did this to me, or somehow circumstances worked against me. We'll blame the demigods, or we're going to blame whoever was the immediate agent, instead of understanding that it was something that we created through our own actions. And even if it was done by someone, they're simply an agent of karma. In Bhakti, Prabhupada gives in his purport, this is a purport to 256 and explains this pretty nicely. He says, such a fully Krishna-conscious person is not at all disturbed by the onslaughts of the threefold miseries, for he accepts all miseries as the mercy of the Lord. And he sees that his miseries, by the grace of the Lord, are minimized to the lowest. So Prabhupada says this in different places, that we feel that when something unfortunate happens to us in the service of Krishna, that we deserved it because of our previous actions. Karma, just similar to what the people in the Yoga Ladder will do, but we consider that Krishna has minimized that he has put his hand in that, and we even actually deserve to suffer more. It's very sweet, actually, from the bhakti point of view. And similarly, when he is happy, he gives credit to the Lord. And Prabhupada says we feel that we didn't deserve it. Of course, we understand that also that is likely due to karma, but we think also that it's the Lord's mercy again that way, and that he has kindly given it to us. It's very sweet. And for the service of the Lord, he is always daring and active, and is not influenced by attachment or aversion. So he says that we may do something that we might not otherwise do, and we will avoid something that we might otherwise do for the service of the Lord. He says that in another place. And consequently, he is not at all angry even when his attempts are unsuccessful. So this is again, there's an understanding of ourselves as spirit soul, but not just spirit soul, but someone who's connected with Krishna and that we're serving him. And so there's that sweet understanding there, that we don't take these things so seriously because we're not identifying with them. We are identifying ourselves as a servant, and so we're willing to. We feel that our miseries are a result of our past activities. We feel that our happinesses are a gift from the Lord out of it that we don't deserve, and we feel anything and everything that can be done in his service is on the table for us. And that really only happens to a high degree when we have that realization of ourselves as a soul that's happening during this period. So these are the kind of things when we look and try to take the temperature of our bhakti. These are the kind of things we're looking for. And if we don't see them, we should probably realize how our attachments and our identifications to our body and mind are very strong. And that's what causes our bhakti to be unsteady. So this is a way to kind of take our temperature in our devotional service. The third of the four questions is, how does the Sthita Pragya remain inactive while controlling the senses? So in this case, if you remember at the very beginning in our Nectar of Instruction, we talked about two definitions of control, especially as they apply to the senses. There are two different kind of definitions. Sometimes we think of control as to stop something. You control the weeds in your lawn, or you control. I'm trying to control spider mites on the tulsi plants that we have. Control means to stop and to curb and to prevent. But there's another definition that's commonly used, such as to operate something. You control a vehicle, you control a drone, you operate a piece of machinery. That's control. People talk about, if they're dancers or athletes, they have body control. It doesn't mean that they stop their movements, but they do it in a very specific way. And so that's going to come up here again in this one. Those in the yoga ladder are going to deal with the first type of control. They try to stop the activities of the senses, whereas the bhaktas are going to control it, just as was said in the Nectar of Instruction, more along the lines of engaging them in a certain way, of operating them in a certain way. So we'll take a look at this a little bit more. So from the answer to this question comes in text 258, and it's a pretty famous verse because of the example used. It says, "One who is able to withdraw his senses from sense objects, as the tortoise draws its limbs within the shell, is firmly fixed in perfect consciousness." So able to withdraw the senses from the sense objects. So in this case, they're not acting. Right? The sense objects are touch, taste, smell, sound, these things. Right? So generally, right, our senses are always engaged in those things. It's usually only through in the yoga practice, Ashtanga yoga practice, they really try to physically draw them in and remove our attention from them, because we still identify with them to a great deal. They tend to function. We can't even imagine not seeing, having our eyes not contact sights, or our ears not pay attention to sounds. This is what it's talking about here. But for bhakti, obviously, we're going to do it a little bit different way. So the Prabhupada says one who realizes the soul understands the senses are extraneous, just like the mind is, or the soul, the senses are part of the body, really. And although they're kind of a little subtle. So one who, in the yogis, if they understand themselves as souls, they'll see that the senses aren't really part of them. They're not integral to them. They're extraneous. And Prabhupada says in his purport, he says, the test of a yogi, devotee, or self-realized soul is that he is able to control the senses according to his plan. Most people, however, are servants of the senses, those Godasa we heard in Nectar of Instruction, and are thus directed by the dictation of the senses. So that's where people usually are doing it. It will be an extraordinary person who can stop those functions. And then Prabhupada says, also in the same purport, he talks about bhakti. He says, unless one is able to follow the do's and the do-nots, restricting oneself from sense enjoyment, it is not possible to be firmly fixed in Krishna consciousness. Keeping the senses always in the service of the Lord is the example set by the analogy of the tortoise who keeps the senses within. So you can see for bhakti, we're talking about the second type of control, operating them, keeping the senses always in the service of the Lord. And here we say following the do's and the do-nots. Right, so there are some things that we're not allowed to do, and there's some things that we're supposed to do. The rules and regulations of bhakti. This is what's talked about here. And so we have to engage the senses in a certain way and not other ways that aren't allowed. And that's considered sense control rather than rather than for the yogi who it says just withdraws the senses from their objects. So they're not being active. The senses, hard to imagine that, isn't it? Even so, that's one of the reasons why bhakti is more accessible and takes less of a certain qualification to begin with. That we don't have to try to, Prabhupada calls it artificially stop the senses, but we simply control them, operate them in the appropriate manner. Okay? So that's the answer to question 3. There's a question?
Yes, Prabhu. The tortoise example looks more relevant to the yoga leader than bhakti.
Well, yeah, I mean, it does look more. It's withdrawing the senses, right? They're withdrawing the senses into the shell.
Yeah.
So that looks more like the yoga system,
Yeah.
both the Ashtanga yoga system and the Jnana yoga system. But there's a bhakti application to that, right? Which means that we operate them in a certain way. We'll see also later on that the Jnana yogis also can operate their senses in a certain way. That's also allowed for them. But it says they're able to just stop them from being contacting their objects, which is very difficult to do, and we'll find out also that it's not very stable generally. But the bhakti application is that we control them in that fashion, and we operate them in a certain way, following the rules and regulations of bhakti. That's how we take it. We don't try to withdraw the senses into the shell. We use them what we do is we don't use them in the service of ourselves. We use them in the service of Krishna and in the ways that are prescribed by the rules and regulations. We have a certain procedure. We talked about that a lot in the Nectar of Instruction as well. And so the fourth question: how does the Sthita-prajna act while using the senses? Okay, so sometimes they also use the senses. Sometimes they're able to withdraw them if they like. And Prabhupada says if there's no service available, I can think of the example like when we chant. If we chant japa, is probably the closest thing that would make sense with the tortoise example. There are some times when we're not very active. We're simply trying to concentrate. We're using our tongue to speak, and we're using our hearing to listen, but it's in a very, very limited and controlled manner, right? And we're trying to hear the mantra, trying to speak it nicely, but it's in a very controlled circumstance, and so most of the other senses are not very active, and these are active in a very narrow sense, and so we see when we do that how it oftentimes is difficult to concentrate in that way. So I'd say that's probably the time when we're closest to the tortoise example. Otherwise, Prabhupada said when there's service available, we do it, and when not, we don't use the senses for anything else besides service. Right? And I'd say that's probably the best analogy there with the tortoise would be when we chant japa, and so we try in that case to focus all of our attention, if we possibly can, on the Hare Krishna mantra. And then we find that it's a bit of a struggle when we do that. But then again, it says even for the, especially for the bhaktas, but even for the yogis, it's possible to act while using the senses instead of having them withdrawn. And so how does that happen? That's answered in text 264. Raga dvesha vimukhtaistu vishayan indriyaischaran atma vasyar videyatma prasadam adhigachati, which is, but a person free from all attachment and aversion, raga dvesha. We talked about that earlier on in the Bhagavad Gita. This attachment and aversion is a very primal part of our nature, that we generally are attached to things that are pleasant, and we're averse to things that are not. And we don't have to learn that. We have that right from birth. Krishna says we're all born under that notion. Even lower forms of life will do that. The trees grow towards the light and avoid the shade, and even they show some hint of that. So a person free from all attachment and aversion, and able to control his senses through regulative principles. It's under one's control, Videya Atma. Vidhi is in there, the rules and regulations. So Prabhupada calls them the regulative principles of freedom, can obtain the complete mercy of the Lord. And so this Videya Atma, rules and regulations, done in a certain way. So the yogis, they can do that if they can use their senses if they follow all the proper rules and regulations, and they're not affected by this attachment and aversion. So they do what they're supposed to do, regardless of whether it's pleasant or unpleasant. Generally, we are attracted to do something that we're not supposed to out of attachment, and we will not do something we're supposed to do out of aversion. We notice that difference with we know the difference between Arjuna and Duryodhana and Dhritarashtra at the beginning, where Dhritarashtra was going to violate the principles, and Duryodhana violate the principles of Dharma, because he was supposed to give the throne to the Pandavas. That was the proper dharmic action to do, but because he desired the throne so badly for his son Duryodhana, they're willing to violate the Dharma. Arjuna was also going to do it. He was not going to do his duty. He was going to avoid his duty because he was averse to it. He thought, this is a terrible thing. I see only bad things in it for me. And so he didn't want to do it. So these things generally pull us away from doing the right thing. And so it says, when somebody doesn't have that, when they're free from that, vimuktais, very free, and are able to act, because here it says the indriya charan, the senses acting upon. So here the senses are acting, but they're under the control of the self, atma vasya, and videya atma, and according to certain rules, then prasadam adhigachati. And Prabhupada gives, there's two senses of the word prasadam. We're very familiar with the one here that Prabhupada uses as mercy. And there's a reason also why he uses that particular thing. Other commentators equate it with another meaning, which is peace. It can be, prasadam can mean peace, so that one can attain peace. Prabhupada uses the prasadam. We're going to see in particular later on why that's important and why it's the mercy of the Lord. There's a very appropriate translation there. Well, some of the other Vaishnavacharyas, Baladeva Jabushan and Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur, translate it as peace. But they also, their other comments also make clear how Prabhupada's is quite appropriate.
This makes more sense. Prasadam, even that is given by God.
Yeah.
So,
well, because for the yogis, at least overtly, they're not so much dealing with the Lord. Although everything, of course, does come from the Lord, we know. But they may not think in such a way. But there's a reason for this, why it's the mercy of the Lord. We're going to find out that. I guess I'll let the cat out of the bag here. We're going to find out in this chapter that the practice of this jnana yoga cannot happen without at least some mixture of bhakti. It cannot stand on its own. That we're going to find out. And this is very clear from this section of the Bhagavad Gita. This is another reason why we focus on bhakti. Because even the bhakti, if it's done properly, fulfills everything else that all the other yogas do. But the other yogas, they cannot succeed unless there's some measure of bhakti included in them. This is a point that Srila Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur makes over and over. In Srimad Bhagavatam, he mentions that in his commentary, that even people who follow the Varnashram system, like if Arjuna is trying to be a Kshatriya, if there isn't some, even if it's small, some slight bhakti present there, then they will not be able to maintain their ashram. They will fall down from the principles. So there's a little bit of bhakti has to be in every other dharma. But bhakti, if done properly, doesn't depend upon anything else. So that's why we're dealing with it here. Let's try to save a little bit questions for the end if we can. Yeah. So in this for this verse, Prabhupada says in his purport, he says, the Krishna conscious person is concerned only with the satisfaction of Krishna and nothing else. Therefore, he is transcendental to all attachment and detachment. This is where he says, if Krishna wants, the devotee can do anything which is ordinarily undesirable, and if Krishna does not want, he shall not do that which he would have ordinarily done for his own satisfaction. And so, of course, as bhaktas, when we see that previous verse, this verse 264, we think that we're following the rules and regulations of bhakti. And why it works is that the Lord's mercy is attracted, that he's attracted by our efforts. And so it's not just a mechanical process. It's always in bhakti a relationship. So it's not just that we do these particular things. Like, if of course there's even in the most mundane things of mentality oftentimes is important. But if you go somewhere and you want to get in tremendous physical shape, and you hire yourself a personal trainer and they put you through all the things, it's primarily just a mechanical thing. You lift the weights, you run, you do this kind of stuff, you eat this way, eat that way, and you get a certain result. It's pretty straightforward thing. With bhakti, you do the things with the mind to please the Lord, and the result comes not just from those activities, although they are beneficial activities in themselves, but they attract the Lord's mercy and his help. And that's so bhakti is never a mechanical process, but it's always a relationship. You're trying to please the Lord, and he's responding in certain ways. Same thing, the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. Sometimes we take it as just a powerful sound vibration that we can use. But no, it's the Lord's name. We're calling out to him, and Krishna responds. And that's how it works. So now that we've understood those four things, what does it look like when one has reached this point of mature understanding, sthita pragya, or achala buddhi, steady intelligence? What it looks like either through the practice of nishkama karma yoga, transitioning into jnana yoga, or through bhakti. How we react to happiness and distress, how we control the senses, and how we act with the senses under control. Now, there's a number of verses here, several verses that take note of how difficult this is to accomplish, and how unstable it is, and and that we have to, in order to make it happen, we have to control both the mind and the senses, and they're both difficult. So the mind and senses are difficult to control. I have in this heading. And one of the verses that highlights that is 260. The senses are so strong and impetuous, O Arjuna, that they forcibly carry away the mind, even of a man of discrimination who is endeavoring to control them. So here it says the senses carry away the mind, and we're going to see how the opposite becomes true. So sometimes the senses carry away the mind, and sometimes the mind carry away the senses. Or the mind is the one that initiates things and breaks the intelligence. That's what happens. So either of these two things can be the root of the problem. So it's not enough if you control the senses without controlling the mind, that will fail. And if the senses are too powerful, even if you're trying to control the mind, it will pull it away. And so really both are necessary in order for there to be stability there. And so the senses are so strong and impetuous, Arjuna, that they forcibly carry away the mind, even of a man of discrimination who is endeavoring to control them. So Prabhupada says in his purport of the same verse 260, there are many learned sages, philosophers, and transcendentalists who try to conquer the senses, But in spite of their endeavors, even the greatest of them sometimes fall victim to material sense enjoyment due to the agitated mind. And he cites this thing this incident in the histories. Even Vishvamitra, a great sage and perfect yogi, was misled by Menaka into sex enjoyment, although the yogi was endeavoring for sense control with severe types of penance and yoga practice. He said that sometimes the temptations are just too strong and the senses carry everything away. And then there's the pair of verses which should be very familiar to almost everybody. There's a whole series of events that happens, and this one starts with the mind, and then leads to the senses, and everything goes from there. There's a whole series of events that happens. It's Bhagavad Gita 262 and 263. It says, while contemplating the objects of the senses, a person develops attachment for them, and from such attachment lust develops, and from lust anger arises. I heard from this kind of devotee friend of mine that in his understanding, he says you have about 2 seconds of grace period there. That's his experience, I guess, that when the mind fixes on an object of the senses, he said if you linger more than a couple of seconds, you're probably in trouble. That's his experience and his advice. Well, you try to change the subject within that 2 seconds and to be safe. So I think it's interesting. But so it says if we think about something, an object of the senses, some type of sound or taste or touch, it says that then we start to desire it. We want to be associated with it. Right? There's a form of sangha there. We want to have that, and which of course attracts more attention. Ooh, that's nice. We want to, and then we want it. Then there's kama. Then we really desire to have it, not just in the mind, but we want to actually experience it. So first it's a little attractive, and then it becomes very attractive. Then we want it. And then it says if we don't get it, or we don't get it in the way we want it, then what happens? Okay, we get angry. Anger is the flip side. So there's kama first. We'll find out in 3rd chapter. Desire comes first, and frustrated desire turns into anger. Because we wanted it and now we don't get it, and we're all disappointed, and so anger comes out. And Prabhupada says in the purport, he says, one who is not therefore in Krishna consciousness. And we're going to see in these little purports some kind of leading up to the point where we understand that none of these things are possible without some aspect of bhakti connected to it. That you can't be successful. You can't be a sthitta pragya without bhakti. And Prabhupada is going to. I kind of selected the quotes partially for the aspect. One who is not therefore in Krishna consciousness, however powerful he may be in controlling the senses by artificial repression, is sure ultimately to fail, for the slightest thought of sense pleasure will agitate him to gratify his senses. And of course, that we will experience the same thing as bhaktas when our bhakti isn't very mature. So it's not that it never happens. It's not that it never happens to bhakti yogis, but it always happens to any other yogis unless they have some tinge of bhakti to help them. So one can only avoid this problem if one has a certain level of mature bhakti. So we will be as bhaktas, we will be very familiar with the succession that's described in these 2 verses, but we have hope. That's the distinction, is we have some hope to escape it. And we will make progress. We should see progress in that regard as we move along and advance in our bhakti. It won't happen all at once, but we get better at it and better at it. And the next step is from anger, complete delusion, samaha, arises. So it says that then we don't remember what the right thing and the wrong thing is to do. When we're angry, you're oftentimes you just follow your anger, and at that moment you do something wrong without even thinking about it. Your brain doesn't even say, no, this isn't the right thing. You're just carried by your anger, and then afterwards you think, why did I do that? So, and from delusion, bewilderment of memory. So when we forget what right and wrong is, then we even forget what our purpose in life is. That we're trying to control the senses, that we're trying to make spiritual advancement. That anger, first of all, makes us be deluded. We don't know what right and wrong is, and then we forget about what our purpose in life is. Here we are, we're devotees of the Lord. We're trying to act in such and such a way, And then it says when memory is bewildered, intelligence is lost. And Baladev Vijayabhushan says that our intelligence is our determination to act in the appropriate way. And so when we forget what our purpose is, we lose our determination, and it says we fall down, the Prabhupada says, fall down again into the material pool. So we lose our whole, we lose everything there. So just by a simple beginning, we contemplate, and it goes one, two, 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 like a set of dominoes, or a Rube Goldberg machine. You end up being done. And of course, you pick yourself up and dust yourself off and try again. But it's very easy to have this, to trigger this series of events that puts you in a position that you're going to regret afterwards. And so Prabhupada says here in the purport 263, the impersonalist therefore cannot enjoy life due to his artificial renunciation, and for this reason a slight agitation of the mind pulls him down again into the pool of material existence. It is said that such a soul, even though rising up to the point of liberation, falls down again due to his not having support in devotional service. You notice here, he does not enjoy, cannot enjoy life. And so this is going to begins points to one of the verses that indicate how bhakti is necessary. We have the higher taste. It allows us to enjoy life. Okay. And so here, the last one that talks about this. The difficulty in controlling the mind and senses, and that makes this possibility of being a sthita pragya very difficult. So there's real obstacles here. Is in 267, as a strong wind sweeps away a boat on the water, even one of the roaming senses on which the mind focuses can carry away a man's intelligence. So even a single thing. And so it carries your understanding away. So it's this is a sailboat type of description here, and so as a strong wind can make your sailboat go, so if the mind picks up one of the uncontrolled senses and focuses on it, then it carries away one's understanding. And Prabhupada says, unless all of the senses are engaged in the service of the Lord, even one of them engaged in sense gratification can deviate the devotee from the path of transcendental advancement. That's from 267 in the purport. So this sets up, I've gone out of order a bit here because I kind of wanted to break it up into topics. So first of all, the answer to the questions. Second of all, the real difficulty in actually being consistent in that position of a sthita pragya, or of attaining it and maintaining it. And then the other portion, which is saying that Hare Krishna says that you really have to have bhakti, at least on some level. So since we're bhaktas, it's really fortunate. That's what we have. But even for the yogis in the yoga ladder, they can't do it just on the power of the nishkama karma yoga or jnana yoga. They have to have in some way some connection. And in 259, this is the famous higher taste verse that we hear about so much. Vishaya vanivartante niraharasya dehana rasavarjam pyasya param drishtva navartate. So there's this param drishtva. Prabhupada says experiencing something superior. Param is far superior things, and drishtva, experiencing. It means the most literal thing with drishtva is to see, is vision. Of course, but we also can say I can say, here is a wonderful preparation. Just taste it, and if you taste it, it's wonderful. You put it in your mouth and say, see. So,
You see that age.
yeah. So you see just also can just mean to, like Prabhupada says here, can be used in a more general sense by experiencing. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and Baladev Vidyabhushan, they use a more direct way, the seeing part. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that param drishtva means seeing the super soul. That someone who has an understanding of the soul and is no longer as distracted by the mind and the body will have the facility to understand that one is not alone. It's described that the soul and the super soul are like two birds in a tree. Right now we're so distracted by external things that we can't even see ourselves. So therefore the super soul is completely invisible as well. But when we come to our own senses and can realize that here we are, we're the observer, we're separate from all these observations that we're focused on, we will almost quite easily, naturally notice that there's somebody else there with us. And so so he talks about the connection with the super soul. Baladev Vidyabhushan just says that they have a really deep experience of the soul itself, that the Gyanis can only make it so far. But anyway, it's something superior. And Prabhupada, since he's dealing specifically with bhakti, he talks about our higher taste connection with Krishna, because we're not trying to see the super soul, we're trying to serve Krishna. And so in devotional service, so it says that the people, and Krishna is going to revisit this in the next chapter. It says somebody who tries to restrain the senses, that's one thing. Even if they can do the tortoise thing, or the turtle thing, pull the senses in, what's really difficult to get rid of is the desire to have those senses being active. And so he even, both Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and Baladev Vidyabhushan, following Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, both say that just like somebody who's sick and fasting, their senses will be pretty inert. You get weak and you can't do anything, you're not very active. And so what's the difference between them, and somebody who's really has control, is that they still have the taste for it. You still want to get healthy and, and be able to engage in various activities again. So that's why Prabhupada says that and Prabhupada uses the example of somebody who's put on a forced diet due to medical conditions. So may have to adopt a certain diet because in order to get healthy, and they may do that, but they still are waiting for the day when they'll be healthy and can eat whatever they want again. So the taste still remains, and so that actually, of course, would be the same thing whether we had the control in the sense of the yogis about stopping the senses, or even by engaging the senses. If there was no happiness, and the Prabhupada said the impersonalists don't have any enjoyment in life. But because we use our senses in the service of Krishna, then we are put in direct contact with Krishna. We have many ways when we take prasadam, when we chant the holy name, and we see the deities, or even just the service itself, is putting us into contact with Krishna. He reciprocates with our actions towards him. And so even from the very beginning, I just was talking with some devotees who, told about, one of them was telling about himself, who he met the devotees in Puerto Rico, and he had been on this, he was being a fruitarian and eating only coconuts and fruits and things for a long time, and he somehow went to the temple, and somehow or other he ended up tasting halava, and that changed his whole world. And a similar thing with this other devotee's wife who did the same thing. and ended up uh, being attracted to halva, Krishna's prasadam, and then moved into the temple almost immediately afterwards because of that taste. So we find that there's a happiness that comes even in the very beginning of our devotional lives by performing devotional service. And that param drishtva, that experience of something higher, Prabhupada calls it a higher taste, is something that attracts us and allows us to enjoy life even more than if we were doing whatever we wanted to do. So we voluntarily surrender our freedom. Prabhupada calls, he says, the regulative principles of freedom. we because you can be free to do whatever you want, right? That's one kind of freedom. Or you can be free from something that oppresses you. That's a different kind of freedom, right? You can be, free from slavery. So we are slaves of the senses. And so by giving up some of our freedom to do whatever we like, we become free from the slavery to the senses. We become, instead of servants of the senses and the tyranny of the senses, we become free to serve the Lord. And the thing that really allows us to do that, the driving force, is that we feel this connection with the Lord. We feel some reciprocation there. We feel something higher. And then we are able to enjoy life, actually, unlike the other persons. So it says this is what it takes. There has to be some deeper connection, either with the soul if you're a yogi, or with the Paramatma, or with Krishna if you're a bhakta. Otherwise, there's not any way that any of the means of control are going to be successful. Certainly not long term. And another verse that describes the necessity of bhakti is 261. Tani sarvani sangyamya yukta asita matparaha pashehi ashendriyani tasya pragya pratishtata. So it's matpara here. That the senses should be controlled but engaged. Right? They're all the senses sarvani. They're controlled samyamya, but they're engaged in relationship with me. And then he says that person. So the translation is one who restrains his senses, keeping them under full control, and fixes his consciousness upon me, is known as a man of steady intelligence. So this is a bhakti thing. It's an element of bhakti. So it says that the yogis, they may just more try to remember Krishna, fix them on him. In some way, we can also engage our senses in his service. We control them by engaging them in his service while remembering him. That's the making him our goal, making him our object of service. And that is that allows for the senses to remain under control, and allows to have that become a pragya pratishtita, fixed consciousness or fixed intelligence, profound knowledge. So that's required. So the yogis have to do that in some way. They have to somehow make Krishna their object. They have to remember him. They have to do something in that way, even for them to do it. And for us, it's actually an intrinsic part of our process. That's what we do. We control the senses in his service. And then he says what happens if that's not done in 266. Nasti buddhir ayuktasya, not engaged. Na cha yuktasya bhavana, na cha bhavayata shantir, ashantasya kutasukam. One who is not connected with the Supreme, Prabhupada says in brackets, in Krishna consciousness, can have neither transcendental intelligence nor a steady mind, without which there is no possibility of peace, and how can there be any happiness without peace? Baladev Vidyabhushan says this bhavana, fixed mind, really kind of means remembrance or meditation on Krishna. And he says without that, then the senses will disturb you. Like he almost puts this as kind of a restatement of the higher taste verse. Unless we're experiencing that meditation on Krishna, unless we're focused on him, And that happens through that being connected, that being yukta, trying to remember him and then trying to engage our senses in his service. Without that connection with Krishna, then we can't meditate either on the soul, the super soul, or the Lord. That's what he's saying. There has to be that you can't experience anything higher. And then without that, then the senses disturb you, so therefore there's no peace. And without peace, there can't be any happiness. That's how that system works. So it interrupts your focus, and then the senses go wild. You don't have any peace, and without peace, there can't be any happiness. So again, here it says this is what happens if you don't maintain your connection with Krishna.
One thing I didn't understand, you're telling without this you cannot understand yourself, super soul, and the Lord. So what is that?
Well, from the yogis, Baladeva Jibushan says that the yogis that Param Dristra is deeper experience of the soul. Baladeva Jibushan says it's experience of Paramatma, and in Bhakti we have it's some experience of Krishna. Okay. So taken from all those different ways, he says that bhavana means your focus. So if you're not connected with the Lord in some way, because if you're a jnana yogi, your bhakti they take bhakti to be just kind of a support for their jnana. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur calls that, he says that's bhakti in the mode of goodness. It's not real bhakti. So that they take it as something that will help them in their service, help them in their jnana. Whereas we take bhakti to be the highest thing and independent of everything else. It acts in a more powerful way. So they may think about Krishna, and that may help them to realize the soul, or it may help them to realize the super soul. Okay, that yuktasi, where it says you have to be connected. For bhaktas, we simply want to be connected with Krishna because we want to realize Krishna. We think he's the ultimate truth. So in any case, however way you're using that previous verse where you have to be connected with Krishna, whether you're a jnani or a different kind of yogi or a bhakta, in any case, though it's the connection with the soul according to Baladeva Vibhushan, it's the connection with the super soul according to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur for yogis, and for bhaktas it's the connection with Krishna that allows us to be able to control the senses, that higher taste. They've described that higher taste in those different ways. So without having that connection with Krishna, then you can't have the focus on this higher taste, the object of the higher that causes the higher taste. Without the higher taste, then the senses go wild, and you're not peaceful. When your senses are disturbed, you're not peaceful, and without being peaceful, you can't be happy. Right. Mm-hmm. So that's how it goes. And then now at the end, there's a few kind of concluding verses that kind of explain further the experience of somebody who's successful and become a stitza pragya, someone who's doing that. It's kind of more like added characteristics that weren't covered at the beginning. A little bit more explanation. And there's 269. What is night for all beings is the time of awakening for the self-controlled, and the time of awakening for all beings is night for the introspective sage. Prabhupada says in the purport, there are two classes of intelligent men. One is intelligent in material activities for sense gratification, and the other is introspective and awake to the cultivation of self-realization. There's two kinds of interests, is really what it comes down to, depending upon how you understand and value things in the world. So for some people, to meditate, to chant, to do service seems like a complete waste of time. And for those of us who have had some higher tastes, we see things that we used to think were the most important things in life are no longer so important. So there's two kinds of intelligence. It means interests and value. You're interested in something that you think has value. So it says that when somebody takes to Krishna consciousness or takes to this yoga practice, then things that other people are very interested in and then makes them become very active and excited do not interest them, and the things that they're interested in aren't interesting to non-yogis or non-devotees. So there's a change happens in your understanding. Okay? And then next we have...
I don't understand, bro. Like, I understood one thing. There are two classes of men.
Uh-huh.
One who are interested in God-related activities.
Yeah.
And other section is who are interested in material activities.
Yeah, and they won't intersect, right? Those who are interested in normal everyday worldly activities won't be interested very much in spiritual activities,
Right.
because they value those things more. They think they're important. And the same thing, those who are engaged in yoga or bhakti, who value spiritual things, then value much less the material things.
Right.
They deal with them only as much as necessary. So they see things from two completely opposite points of view.
Right.
Prabhupada wrote this little pamphlet in the early days about who is crazy. Which one of them? Each one thinks the other one is crazy.
Right.
You simply don't understand things properly. What are you doing that for? How come you're acting that way? And they'll say that to each other. Okay?
So why Krishna told this verse?
Because this is what happens to us. He told this verse because especially when we become sthita pragya, then our way of looking at things completely changes.
Yes.
And so before we were the one type of intelligent person, intelligent for material activities, and now we will become the other type of intelligence. Will develop the other type of intelligence. That's why. This is what's happening as we become more advanced in devotional service, more advanced in yoga. Our perspective changes.
Okay, this is to tell that do not be bewildered if the people around you saying that you are wasting your time.
Well, I mean, it just means that can be one application of it. We can say that we shouldn't be surprised when people think that you're wasting your time, and shouldn't worry about it. But also, we should see that our intelligence is changing.
Right.
That's also something that we can look at and see. Are we seeing things that way now, or are we thinking in some ways that we're spending too much time with this devotion? So it's an indication of advancement of spiritual life. Then 270, a person who is not disturbed by the incessant flow of desires that enter like rivers into the ocean, which is ever being filled but is always still, can alone achieve peace, and not the man who strives to satisfy such desires. Prabhupada, in other places, he says that that as long as we have the body, there will be desires. But how do we react to them? And so it says someone who's a sthita pragya, they may come, but he doesn't try to fulfill them.
Okay.
Right? So he says, so therefore, it's just like the rivers flow into the ocean, and the ocean isn't changed by that. The desires come and go, and they don't try to fulfill them. So the Prabhupada says here in the purport, that is the proof of a Krishna-conscious man. One who has lost all inclinations for material sense gratification, although the desires are present. Because he remains satisfied in the transcendental loving service of the Lord, he can remain steady like the ocean and therefore enjoy full peace. The mind is still going to operate. And so things we may still say, what about this, what about that? Depending upon our advancement in spiritual life, we'll react in different ways. When one way is it'll come up and we'll think, oh, that's a good idea. Another time we'll say, it comes up and says, no, I'm busy doing something more important. In the higher level, we talked about when it reaches spontaneous devotional service, we think, what is the use of that? It gets higher and higher.
Even now it happens. Sometimes the same thing we accept it, and sometimes the same.
Yeah, so sometimes now we will say yes, and sometimes we'll say not. So will come a time when it comes up and we say we're not interested in that. And then it may come a time later on when we say, I have no interest in that at all. Why is it even coming?
So then there is a fight between mind and intelligence.
Yeah. And then right now the intelligence sometimes loses the fight.
Yes.
Okay. But later on it will not. That's sthita pragya means the intelligence is very profound. It doesn't lose the fight.
Right.
You see? So 71, it says, a person who has given up all desires for sense gratification and who lives free from desires, who has given up all sense of proprietorship and is devoid of false ego, he alone can attain real peace. There's the nirmamo nirahankara. Nothing is mine, and no false ego. So the false ego is that we understand we're something different than a servant of Krishna, and that we're not necessarily a spirit soul. And for the real ego means that we're an eternal servant of Krishna. Right? And so Prabhupada, he focuses on that in the portion of his purport. This is 271. A materially desireless person certainly knows that everything belongs to Krishna. He quotes the Isha Upanishad, Ishavashamidam Sarvam. And therefore he does not falsely claim proprietorship over anything, nirmama. This transcendental knowledge is based on self-realization, namely knowing perfectly well that every living entity is an eternal part and parcel of Krishna in spiritual identity, and that the eternal position of the living entity is therefore never on the level of Krishna or greater than him. So this is the ahankara part. And also the part that means that we're dealing here with realization of the soul. This understanding of Krishna consciousness is the basic principle of real peace. So somebody in this case is nirmamo nirahankara, no proprietorship, no false ego. We understand who they really are. From the yogic perspective, they understand their souls more than anything. But for devotees, it's the eternal servant of Krishna. And in the last verse in the chapter, and we're running a little bit late here, so we're going to kind of tie it up with the next verses. That is the way of the spiritual and godly life, after attaining which a man is not bewildered. If one is thus situated, even at the hour of death, one can enter into the kingdom of God. This is Brahma Nirvana. Different commentators take that in different ways, but Prabhupada calls it the kingdom of God, and it just means transcendence in a more general way. And so Krishna was telling, even from the very beginning, we saw in that the text 13, 14, 15, and 16, 12, 13, 14, 15, how Krishna was aiming at 15, we were aiming immediately at transcendence, and later on he said to become free from the modes of material nature. So this is what happens. If we come to the Stita Pragya level, we're able to enter transcendence. And Prabhupada says, actual life begins after the completion of this material life. For the gross materialist, it is sufficient to know that one has to end this materialistic way of life. But for persons who are spiritually advanced, there is another life after this materialistic life. Before ending this life, if one fortunately becomes Krishna conscious, he at once attains the stage of Brahma Nirvana. This is where Prabhupada is explaining why he calls it the kingdom of God. This transcendence means, real transcendence means, he says, is not just the removal of material life, but the beginning of spiritual life. So he says some Buddhists and other people may think that the things just end. But he says, no, what Krishna means, and Krishna, of course, will explain this more carefully later on. But anyway, he means liberation, at least they're going beyond the material world here. But for devotees, it means, very clearly going back to the kingdom of God. And then at the very end here, I just have a quote from that 272 purport where Prabhupada says, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur has summarized this second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita as being the contents for the whole text. In the Bhagavad Gita, the subject matters are Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga. In the second chapter, Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga have been clearly discussed, and a glimpse of Bhakti Yoga has also been given as the contents for the complete text. See, so even here Prabhupada is acknowledging, even though he talks bhakti, 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 he's acknowledging that actually Krishna is talking about these other yogas as well. But we already explained why bhakti is really the only significant successful path. And so that's why he talks bhakti, bhakti, bhakti. So he's saying here's a glimpse of bhakti yoga. That's where Krishna points out that you can't do it without the higher taste. You can't do it without being connected with Krishna. That these other yogas depend upon bhakti. And so Krishna he's introduced bhakti openly in those verses, and then we'll get more and more, especially when we get into the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th chapter, we'll discuss bhakti very directly and in much more detail. So I'm going to take a look here at our chats here. We have any? And yeah, it says that the soul must be actively regulating all the time. Well, the soul is a part of action. The soul has to decides. It's a feature of action. We talked about this a little bit previously when Krishna was telling Arjuna that the only bodies kill bodies during fights. The soul doesn't kill or isn't killed. So physical actions are done with help from outside agencies, the devatas and such things. The body can't move without their help. But the soul is still a function of action because it makes the decision what to do. And so the more that we are thinking of ourselves as bodies and minds, the more we listen to what the bodies and minds tell us. And we say yes to them. As we realize ourselves as soul more and we pay less attention to these things, and we develop this Dityapragya, this new intelligence, and therefore we act in different ways because of that. So the soul is making different decisions. Let me act in a spiritual way instead of a material way. So I'm going to unmute. Do you have a question here, Prabhu? Otherwise, I'm going to also unmute everybody here. Go into.
One question.
Okay, so let's take your question first.
Yeah. Prabhu, you told bhakti is independent of other practices.
Yes.
But it appears to me, you just clarify that bhakti has a dependency on other practices. I mean to say, one should have the knowledge that who is Krishna without all the Bhagavad Gita knowledge. This is all like kind of jnana, right? So unless this support of jnana is not there, how can bhakti can sustain? And with respect to karma, still nishkama karma yoga kind of it's mixed with bhakti that we implement in our lives.
No, okay. So he's saying that it looks like bhakti depends upon both knowledge and about this nishkama karma yoga in order to progress. But the actual fact is when you're dealing with knowledge of bhakti, that's because we hear that the beginning of bhakti is hearing, right? So there's information there. The deeper knowledge that comes, usually when we talk about jnana, we talk about this kind of, it develops into something deep like the understanding of the soul. All right, this is when, first we have sankhya, right, the kind of theoretical knowledge about the soul and such. And then through that, as that knowledge deepens and there's renunciation, then there's realization of the soul. With bhakti, we hear some information about Krishna. Okay, that's a different type of knowledge. Okay, we hear something, or even if we don't, say somehow we see somebody chanting and we decide to chant, right? Or somebody tastes halava, and then wants to inquire. So some people they didn't have any knowledge, they tasted halava first, and then then they came and then they heard something. So it's a different kind of knowledge when it relates directly to Krishna's and Krishna's service. That the Gyanis only talk about knowledge of matter and spirit. Their knowledge is of matter and spirit. And then our actions, see the yogis then, to try to understand that theoretical knowledge about the soul, they will do their duty while not having material desires. Okay, that's already integral in bhakti. By serving Krishna, you automatically are pleasing Krishna and not yourself. Okay? So that's why it says that yoga is included in bhakti. But bhakti automatically performs that duty. You see, but automatically. But if you serve Krishna with just for His pleasure, automatically you're not you're doing what people do in nishkama karma yoga, and by serving Krishna, the deeper intelligence develops and renunciation. It says it's a byproduct of bhakti. So these things are components of bhakti, but bhakti does them all automatically. It doesn't need support from anything else. And so some people, Prabhupada says later on we'll see in the 10th chapter, it says even if somebody is not very intelligent and can't understand the philosophy, if they somehow serve Krishna, Krishna will give them the intelligence to do it. So it's just the service that matters. And if we're intellectual type people, there's plenty of philosophy to listen to. That's also devotional service. See, so it's a different kind of knowledge. Okay?
So jnana knowledge does not teach anything about Krishna.
No, jnana is usually is aimed at liberation. You distinguish between matter and spirit, and you've come to the conclusion that spirit can live without matter. We talked about that before, where with the Vedavata they believe that there's a soul,
Right.
and they believe that the soul goes through many bodies, but they do not think that the soul has any use by itself.
They don't have
That
knowledge of liberation.
yeah, they don't have knowledge of liberation. The soul, they think that the soul and the body are two parts of an entity, two necessary components. If you have a soul without a body, it can't do anything.
Right.
It's not useful, right? And of course, without a soul, then the body can't act either. So that's generally how they think. But the Gyanis, they understand that there's a soul that can live independently, and can exist outside of matter. We understand that the soul is an entity,
Right.
and is connected with Krishna.
Okay.
And so it's a different
Your
thing.
explanation, my understanding is whatever jnana that is related to bhakti, it is not outside bhakti, it is part of bhakti.
That's right. It's part of it. Yeah. So all the things in the other yogas are automatically included in bhakti.
Okay.
We're looking at the other yogas because we want to make sure. That means in complete bhakti. If we're doing bhakti properly, it'll include all those things.
Right.
So we're trying to take a look and understand what these other yogas do,
Right.
to see if our bhakti seems to be doing that.
And the reason you told jnana and karma, they have to depend on bhakti. My understanding of it is they make use of bhakti to progress in jnana. That is why we say that they are dependent on bhakti.
Yes, Krishna mentioned that you have to have the higher taste, so that they will not be successful in fully realizing the soul, or at least maintaining that understanding without some support from bhakti.
Okay.
They have to have that. Krishna says if they're not connected, if they're not matparaha, if they're not connected and in relation to him, then they cannot control the senses.
Okay.
And so and that will carry them away from they won't be sthita pragya. They might have profound knowledge, they might be pragya, but they won't be stitya. They won't be able to be consistent, be fixed in that understanding. They'll vacillate back and forth. So they need to have some help from bhakti, and even in other places, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, even to perform the nishkama karma yoga, even to do karma yoga, even with desires, it takes some conception of the Supreme, at least some bit of bhakti in there. Otherwise, you can't even follow even karma yoga with desires.
Okay.
You can't maintain. And this is a certain because what you're trying to do usually in everything besides bhakti, there's some kind of selfish interest. Even it's a very purified in jnana. We're looking for liberation. It's very purified. It's very rarefied, I'd say. But there's still a selfish idea. You want to get rid of the suffering of material existence, right? And so, in one sense, you're dealing still with some kind of tinge of kama, of desire. And desire, we know, we'll find out from the third chapter, is a very volatile substance. And so when you're doing karma yoga, doing karma with desires for the results, then it's really strongly present.
Right.
The kama, you're trying to get something. With the nishkama, of course, you're trying to remove that. But if it's not devotional, you're thinking of trying to move towards liberation. Even there, liberation is more your goal. Again, there's some selfishness in there. So where there's selfishness, there's some inherent instability. And so that can only be mitigated by a little bit of bhakti. By Krishna, we heard how in the Ishopanishad how Krishna is shuddham, purifying. Yeah. And so he's pure and he purifies. Prabhupada used it in both senses. And so a little bit of tinge of bhakti is required to keep us from suffering the effects of the instability that's caused inherently by selfish desire.
Okay.
Okay?
So, Prabhu, it looks like the impersonalists having bhakti to become God. Like they think bhakti is a means by practicing sometime bhakti.
Well, the problem is, of course, there's different kinds of impersonalists. Okay, so there's Mayavadis, and then there's Brahmavadis. So persons who are performing jnana may be looking for liberation, and they may not have a strong conception they may not have a strong attraction to the God's form. We have examples of that in Srimad Bhagavatam, with the 4 Kumaras. They were attracted to the Brahmajyoti.
Okay.
And then they visited Vaikuntha,
Uh,
and they smelled the aroma of the tulsi leaves at the feet of the Lord, and then their minds became changed.
okay.
Now the Mayavadis, or the strict followers of Shankaracharya, they will say that the personal form of the Lord is part of illusion. Okay? So they may apparently practice bhakti. And they also can say you can worship anybody. That worship, even though it somehow brings you closer to the platform of being able to understand. It's part of illusion, so the worship will have to be discontinued. So you can worship Krishna, you can worship any deity you like. But at the point of liberation, you give that up.
Okay.
Right? Because that's all illusory. Your deity is illusory, you're illusory, you're part of the world of illusion, and you give that up. So that is offensive to the Lord, to think of his form as imaginary. And so that in that case, the beneficial part of bhakti is certainly outweighed by the offensive part. Okay, so in that sense, you cannot the Mayavadi can't have success.
They will never liberate.
It's not going to happen for them. So it's inherently offensive. But the Brahmavadi can be a different thing. They simply are attracted to Brahman. They haven't understood we heard the whole Isha Upanishad was about how Krishna is a unique type of being. Yeah? And so somebody may be more attractive to Brahman, thinking that it's complete, or a form is partial. We found out how that's not the case in the Isha Upanishad. And so we understand why we're attracted to the form and not to Brahman. Okay? All right, well, I think we've kind of run over time a little bit here. It took me a little longer than I expected during the presentation, so I think let's stop here. We're going to start chapter 3 next week. We are gone for a couple weeks. I was out of town, and so I'm back, and we're going to try to get back on track with the every week classes now. I had to make kind of a quick preparation this week. We got back on Thursday night, so I'll have the full week to prepare for the next one. Hope you didn't notice too much of a drop off because of the hastiness this week. But thank you for tuning in and for being here, and thank those who may listen to the recordings. And so we'll be back next week, same time, same place, and similar subject. Hare Krishna.